Russia and China veto a UN Security Council resolution aborting a Western push to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court. Thailand's army chief announces a military takeover, dissolving the government and suspending the constitution. Heavy clashes in eastern Ukraine between Kiev's forces and separatists leaves over a dozen dead as presidential elections loom. Good evening and welcome to Aletija World News. I'm Maryam Khaddad. China and Russia vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court for possible prosecution of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by both sides during the three-year war. It is the fourth time both countries have blocked Western resolutions relating to the three-year conflict in Syria. The Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, called the French-drafted resolution a publicity stunt that would hurt efforts to find a political solution to the crisis.
Sadly, because of the decision by the Russian Federation to back the Syrian regime no matter what it does, the Syrian people will not see justice today. They will see crime, but not punishment.
Единство пятерки важно.
P5 unity is important. After all, it is the reason for which France has been pushing for the P5's engagement in a political settlement of this crisis, having failed, however, to advance any positive ideas. Then why deal such a blow to the P5 unity at this stage? Is it just to try once again to create a pretext for armed intervention in the Syrian conflict?
The Syrian crisis has revealed the depth of the double-standard policy taking over the Security Council. The recent decision is a move by some to impose their will on the Syrian people.
Meanwhile, the Syrian army has broken a year-long rebel siege on Aleppo's main prison after heavy fighting with al-Qaeda-linked militants and other Islamist brigades. The recent gains by government troops will cut key supply routes used by militants in the strategic area.
After a fiercely fought battle with al-Qaeda militants and other Islamist brigades for the strategic point, the Syrian army has ended a year-long militant siege on Aleppo's central prison. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported the advancement. After a siege of nearly 13 months by al-Nusra Front and Islamist rebels, regular armed forces backed by pro-regime fighters were able to break the siege of Aleppo's central prison. The observatory added that Syrian troops entered the prison compound with tanks and armored vehicles, while intense celebratory gunfire was heard inside the sprawling complex. The area is strategically important as it lies near a key supply route for foreign-backed fighters in militant-held parts of Aleppo, meaning the advancement cuts the path of essential supplies to insurgents between areas they control and the Turkish border. At the same time, the recapture of the prison and its surroundings implies that government forces have control over the northeastern entrance to the city, making the Kassilo Road, which links militant-held parts of Aleppo to the northern countryside, within the Syrian army's reach. Militants, including insurgents from al-Qaeda's al-Nusra Front, have tried repeatedly to storm the prison and free its inmates, bombing and breaching its outer walls, but failing to take full control. According to the observatory, fighting in the area has killed at least 50 militants since Tuesday. Meanwhile, in Hama province, following violent clashes between Syrian troops and foreign-backed militants on the one hand, and al-Nusra and Islamist extremists on the other, the army has advanced towards the town of Merk and taken control of two hills overlooking the town. Also, in fighting between rival militant groups has intensified in the Deir ez-Zor province. The Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant has killed at least 32 Islamic Brigade and al-Nusra Front fighters in the Al-Tawamiyya village in the eastern countryside.
Mimi Laham, a political activist in Sydney, joins me now via Skype for more insight into this UN attempt to refer Syria to the ICC. Mimi, what would it mean for the Syrian government if the war is referred to the International Criminal Court?
Well, the ICC is basically a kangaroo court. Syria is not in fact signatory to the ICC and doesn't recognize its power. So when the court itself has never actually trialed a U.S. president for any of the war crimes that resulted in the very, very, very horrible wars that we witnessed over the last decade. For example, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan. There's been no trial against Bush for using depleted uranium that has caused a lot of birth defects in Fallujah and continues to do so. And the only trials we did see were against small African countries and the Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. So all of these are leaders that are against U.S. hegemony, and it seems that the ICC, the kangaroo court, is only specifically for those leaders who the U.S. doesn't like. The referral mentioned the crimes of both sides, but who from the rebel side would actually stand trial? Basically, this
we appear to be having some technical difficulties. We will try to get Mimi back in a couple minutes if we can. For now, let's move on. Three bombs targeting Shia pilgrims in Baghdad have killed at least 28 people and wounded dozens more. The attack struck the Mansour neighborhood in western Baghdad, Bab al-Sharji in the center of the city, as well as the neighborhood of Shab, as worshippers prepared to commemorate the death of a revered figure in Shia Islam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. Similar attacks have been carried out by the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. The Iraqi army is currently involved in wide-scale military operations against the group in the western province of Anbar. Thailand's army chief has announced that the military has seized power and, in effect, mounted a coup in a bid to restore stability and order after 6 months of political deadlock and turmoil.
In a statement broadcasted live on every TV channel in the country, Thailand's army chief Prayut Chan-o-cha announced in an address to the nation that armed forces were seizing power, or in other words, a military coup had been mounted, after months of deadly political turmoil.
In order for the country to return to normal quickly, the National Peacekeeping Committee, comprised of the army, the Thai Armed Forces, the Royal Air Force, and the police need to seize power as of May 22 at 4:30 p.m.
The army chief stated that the military rule would work to restore order in the country and would push through the political reform. Chan-o-cha also stressed that international relations will not be affected by the move. The military declared a nationwide curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. and ordered demonstrators on both sides of the kingdom's political divide to disperse and go home after nearly 7 months of rival rallies in the capital. It also banned public gatherings of more than 5 people, summoned the ousted cabinet to report to the army, and suspended the constitution, except for the section related to the monarchy. Moments before Prayut's stunning announcement, witnesses said they saw leaders of Thailand's 2 main political parties and its rival protest movements removed by the military from a venue where Prayut had convened talks aimed at resolving their differences. However, it was unclear if they were formally detained. The tough-talking Prayut said he seized power because of the violence in Bangkok and many parts of the country that resulted in loss of innocent lives and property and was likely to escalate. The latest in a string of coups dates back to over 80 years, caps months of increasing political tension pitting a Bangkok-based royalist elite and its backers against the democratically elected government, aligned to Thaksin Shinawatra, where Sister Yingluck was dismissed as premier earlier this month in a controversial court ruling.
Let's get some more analysis on this military coup in Thailand with Wayman Bennett, a political activist in London. Now, will military rule really appease the months of political deadlock in Thailand?
Well, I actually think it's quite surprising that what you've got is a situation where a government, both elected has been removed essentially by military armed forces, and I don't believe it's going to lead to greater stability. In fact, the history of military intervention into democratic elected governments has led to more imbalance. What's truly amazing is that nobody around the world seems to have commented on the intervention of the military into what I describe as government events. It seems very clear that there were talks aimed at resolving the differences, and the question of the military coming into power, actually far from bringing stability in the long run, really begins to question the whole question of the democratic process.
Well, can we expect the pro-government red shirts to respond violently?
Well, the real question is that if you look at the history that's taken place every time that the military has intervened in major parts of Thailand, has been that there's been a response, and what I do believe is that if there's going to be a resolution of this issue, that it can only be solved politically. It can't be solved by the military saying that there's, of course, that there's been difficulties in terms of maintaining order. It needs to be resolved in terms of people being able to put their input in it, and not, I think, in some senses, very clearly, I think that there's going to be an intervention by people who want the democratic right to express resistance, which cannot be determined by a military government.
And is this effectively the end of the Shinawatra dynasty?
I would say that, the instability that's been going on for over 7 months, that, you can, in some senses, it goes back all the way back to the original instability in the economy after the devaluation of the baht at least 8 or 10 years ago, that there's been an attempt to bring some form of stability into major parts of the country. And really what you've seen is the fallout from 2008 in many countries. That's happened all over the world, taking place inside Thailand. And one of the things that we have to say is the response of a military intervention isn't really going to solve the underlying social and political issues that have led to this conflict.
Well, you mentioned a little while ago, the military ousted Yingluck's brother in 2006, but that was not enough to drive the Shinawatra family from office. So what is going to be different this time around? Well,
the real problem is that you've had court cases that have removed people from government. They haven't resolved the question of which party has the constitutional right to rule. And this time, in terms of a resolution that can come through, it would need to come through either the reintroduction of new elections, the acceptance of those elections as fair and acceptable to the majority of the population. And the real problem is that what I see happening now is that a military government comes to power and doesn't allow any civilian rule. In fact, returns back to a situation in which the military continue to rule without recourse to the general people in Thailand.
So how long can we expect military rule in Thailand to last?
Well, the real question is, will they get Western backing? And the real question is, in most countries in the world, if this was taking place as a process, there would be questioning of how this has taken place, and there would be some level of intervention or political call for accounts to be made. But actually, if you look at most of the discussion about this, there's been total silence, really. And one must question why, if it had been part of what's happening in part of Eastern Europe at the moment, there's a lot of questions both by most of the European powers about what is going on there. But here you see total silence, and I believe you see total silence because there isn't a willingness to intervene, at least to demand that democratic principles are upheld.
Well, let's just elaborate on that. To what degree will international relations actually be affected by this military coup?
Well, one of the problems is that people claim legitimacy at the moment about military coups and about military powers is that usually this is declared to be something which is undesirable and is thoroughly rejected. But what you see is that what's described as the world community, the international community, has remained silent about this. Of course, this is a matter for the Thai people to have the right to decide who governs them. And the intervention into the military needs to be questioned, because the experience of military interventions in the region has been that it's very difficult for people to get their voice heard. And we've seen many of the demonstrations that took place in Thailand, actually further afield in Indonesia, where people demanded a return of people power, is that once the military are in, it's very difficult to remove them. And so I'm very nervous about what's happening, and I'm sure that many people there are nervous about what's happening, and we have to call for a return to democratic rule.
Well, let's just change course a little bit. What about these press reports suggesting that social media platforms will be blocked if they are found to oppose the military coup? Does that suggest that freedom of expression will not be respected?
Well, I think that we've got to be very clear that when we see a move which has been, we're told, is under the question of social order, that's the reason why they've had to have control over social media. What we're seeing down is a shutting down of debate. And I think it's very important that we recognise this. If this was happening in any country, which many countries in the West would deem as being undemocratic, then there would be an outcry and a demand that there's an opening up of this control. We saw this around China, around different countries where people said that they had to open up and allow open discussion. I hope that these standards are imposed as well on the military regime that's taken over inside Thailand, and that there's a deep questioning to make sure that human rights are maintained in the country so that people have the right to have freedom of expression, even if that freedom of expression takes the point of disagreement. Of course, we want it to be peaceful, but we also have to recognise that the democratic process is paramount when it comes on to making decisions about who should make or judge or run the country.
All right, Mr. Wayman Bennett, a political activist, thank you very much. As Ukraine prepares for Sunday's presidential elections, the newly formed parliament in Donetsk has voted to prevent polls from taking place in the eastern region, where overnight clashes between forces loyal to Kiev and pro-Russian activists killed at least 14 soldiers.
The parliament in the recently seceded region of Donetsk has overwhelmingly voted in favor of boycotting Ukraine's presidential elections. The Donetsk region, which alongside Luhansk held a referendum to break away from the government in Kiev and even asked Moscow to incorporate it into the Russian Federation, is banning Ukraine's presidential elections from taking place on the pro-Russian territory.
We are ready to do everything to prevent the election from taking place.
I don't want to live in this Ukraine. I want to live in the Donetsk People's Republic because I have already made my choice.
Meanwhile, tensions between Ukrainian soldiers and separatists flared in the east, killing at least 14 troops.
There was an overnight attack north of Luhansk. There was an attack above Volnovakha in the Donetsk region. During tense clashes, we managed to repel all terrorist attacks. But unfortunately, we confirm losses on the Ukrainian side during overnight clashes.
Following the pre-dawn attack, pro-Russian residents awoke to inspect the damages caused by the fighting. Their burnt possessions were still smoldering.
The sound was so loud and rockets were flying. We were hiding in the basement, just trying to find a place. Someone was lying on the floor. It's difficult to describe. It's horrible. I used to work here.
As the government in Kiev prepares to hold presidential elections on May 25th, the situation in the east remains tense, especially with pro-Russian activists refusing to take part in the vote, which they claim does not represent them.
Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk has appealed to the UN to convene a special Security Council session ahead of a presidential election this Sunday. The call by Yatsenyuk comes following those reports that at least 14 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in overnight clashes with pro-Russian separatists in the east of the country.
Ми звертаємось до наших партнерів.
We are calling on our partners at the United Nations to call an emergency session of the UN Security Council as soon as possible. At the meeting, we will submit evidence that with an escalation of the conflict, bloodshed, attempts to seize Ukrainian border posts, and successful attempts, Russia wants to torpedo the presidential election.
NATO's top military commander has said that Russian military forces positioned close to the Ukrainian border remain a threat despite a partial withdrawal. It is, however, the first time during the Ukrainian crisis that NATO has given any credence to Russian statements that it is withdrawing troops from near the Ukrainian border.
We have seen some movement. It's too early to know where they're moving to or how many of them are moving. But what we do know is that the force that remains on the border is very large, and it's very capable and remains in a very coercive posture.
Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani has expressed optimism about ongoing negotiations between the West and Tehran over the country's nuclear program. However, should the two sides fail to hammer out a deal before the July 20th deadline, Rouhani said the talks could be extended for another 6 months.
The stage was all his, and Iran's President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani did not disappoint. Sheikh Rouhani told reporters in Shanghai, where he attended the 4th Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia Summit, that nuclear talks between Iran and the P5+1 are at a sensitive phase, but stressed that it is very likely that a permanent accord will be reached before the negotiations expire, despite efforts to disrupt the process.
The signs that we have been receiving in the last few days are telling us we are likely to come to an agreement by the end of July. There are certain countries behind the scenes that want to create problems. If they are not given a chance to sabotage talks, then we have enough time to achieve the ultimate success.
However, should the two sides fail to hammer out a deal before the July 20th deadline, Rouhani said the talks could be extended for another 6 months.
Let's say we don't come to agreement by that deadline. We can extend that interim agreement by another 6 months.
In an interview with CCTV on Wednesday, Rouhani said that Iranian-US relations could enter a new phase on the condition that Washington renounces its animosity toward Tehran and compensates for its past actions. Iran's relations with the West, particularly the US, improved after Rouhani's election, after which the Islamic Republic went through a diplomatic makeover and adopted a different approach toward Western powers. Now it remains to be seen whether ongoing negotiations between representatives from Iran and the P5+1 over Tehran's nuclear program will bear the fruit of Iran's new diplomatic overtures.
Dr. Fawad Izadi, a professor at Tehran University, earlier gave us further insight into those negotiations over Tehran's nuclear energy program.
Yes, I think the message that President Rouhani has for P5+1 members is that Iran is very much interested in reaching a settlement and reaching an agreement with the other side. And at the same time, Iran has other options. The fact that Dr. Rouhani has traveled to China, has met with President Putin, has met with Chinese leaders, is a sign that is a signal that Iran is sending to the West, that if they push Iran too hard, they are going to increase their cooperation with Eastern powers. They are going to basically bypass sanctions as much as they can through cooperation with countries like China and Russia, and they are basically going to make a determination in Iran's foreign policy to answer the other side back in the same way that they are pressuring Iran. So the message that Dr. Rouhani is sending to the Western powers is that they need to come to a settlement before it's too late. If we reach that agreement, I think the nuclear portfolio will not be used to pressure Iran politically and economically. And if Iran receives less pressure from the Western side, Iran will be more willing to cooperate on regional issues. As you know, US troops are leaving Afghanistan. by the end of this year. Iran can play an important role in stabilizing the situation there. Iran is playing a role in Iraq in terms of making sure the new government there is going to be able to function, and Iran is helping the new government in many ways. So Iran can do things that are beneficial for the stability in this part of the world, and if there is an agreement with Iran, the US can also benefit from this stability. I think given the history, you cannot be very optimistic. I think in the last 30-some years, US has left a very bad image in the minds of Iranian people and Iranian leaders. I think a lot of people are not very sure whether US is going to actually adhere to the issues that they agree upon. But at the same time, I think the new Iranian government wants to give the other side a chance to see whether they may recalculate how they deal with Iran. After all, it has been 35 years since the victory of Islamic Revolution. You would expect they need to get over that idea that Islamic Revolution is going to go away. I think they need to realize that Iran's government is here to stay, and they need to change their policies based on that realization. Whether that will happen or not, we don't know.
Meanwhile, the head of the Public Relations Department at Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps said that the reason why the Israeli regime not taking any military measures against the Islamic Republic is because it fears a counterattack. The Iranian military official added that the international community has confirmed the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program, stating that everybody knows the Islamic Republic is not in pursuit of nuclear weapons. You're watching Al-Attijah World News, coming up after the break. The two Koreas exchange artillery fire in disputed waters. We'll have that story after the break. Welcome back. Our top stories this hour. Russia and China veto a UN Security Council resolution aborting a Western push to refer Syria to International Criminal Court. Thailand's army chief announces a military takeover, dissolving the government and suspending the constitution. Heavy clashes in eastern Ukraine between Kiev's forces and separatists leaves over a dozen dead as presidential elections loom. Well, Lebanon's parliament has now botched 5 attempts to elect President Michel Sleiman's successor, only days before his mandate comes to an end on May 25th.
5 times and no quorum. Once again, Lebanon's lawmakers have failed to appoint a new president. This is the latest attempt to elect a successor to President Michel Sleiman before his mandate ends later this week. Only 73 lawmakers were present at the session. falling short of the minimum 86 parliamentarians required for a vote to be held. Meanwhile, Speaker Nabi Haberde announced that the parliament is going to remain in open session for 3 days to vote for a new head of state.
The Speaker has for now, as we say, concluded the session, but told the parliament that sessions are open for now until the 25th. Open meaning if anything happens, they call a session within a quarter of an hour.
Lebanon's president lies in the hands of a consensus between the country's two main blocs, March 14, led by the Future Movement, and March 8, led by the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah. Deep divisions between the two sides over the war in neighboring Syria have delayed any decision.
I think we're heading towards a vacuum in the president's place and not having a vote. And so, this is a negative message to the international community and to the Lebanese people that we're waiting for the presidential election to achieve progress, prosperity and stability at different levels.
The sectarian complexity of the Lebanese political process stipulates that the president has to be a Maronite Christian. While the March 14 bloc has backed former Civil War warlord and the head of the Lebanese forces, Samir Jaja, as their candidate, March 8 has opposed this option. Failing to choose a successor to Suleiman would not only leave a presidential vacuum, but would cause the Lebanese parliament to lose authority to legislate, leaving the country politically crippled.
Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah is set to head the new unity government, due to be formed as part of a deal with Hamas, aimed at ending 7 years of rival administrations in the West Bank and Gaza.
It's only a matter of days before a new Palestinian consensus government between the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Islamist movement Hamas is finalized. With the government nearly ready, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has already appointed the new Prime Minister, Rami Hamdallah. Hamdallah is the Prime Minister of the West Bank-based Palestinian Authority. Last year in June, he offered his resignation over, quote, a conflict over authority within his cabinet. 6 weeks after Hamdallah's resignation, Abbas asked him to form a new government, which he did 3 months later. His rival Prime Minister in Gaza, Ismail Haniyeh, has announced he has no objection to the recent decision of his appointment. On April 23rd, Hamas and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, dominated by Abbas's Fatah party, signed a surprise reconciliation deal aimed at forging a unified administration. Under the deal, the two sides were to form an independent government of technocrats, headed by Abbas, paving the way for long-delayed elections. If all goes well, the new government should be finalized by Sunday. For now, Palestinians will welcome Hamdallah's appointment as a step in the right direction towards reconciliation.
Libyan renegade General Khalifa Haftar has called on the government to hand over power to the country's top judges, mounting a challenge against Tripoli as heavy fighting continues in the capital.
Libya's retired army chief Khalifa Haftar, who launched an assault against Islamists in Benghazi, has warned that Libya has become a terrorist hub, calling for a civilian presidential high council to form an emergency cabinet and organize legislative elections. Claiming to speak in the name of the army, Haftar urged the country's highest judicial authority to form a civilian presidential high council, tasked with forming an emergency cabinet and organizing legislative elections.
Following the refusal by the expired National Council to meet the people's demands, the High Council of the Armed Forces calls on the High Judicial Council, in charge to meet the army's demand for civil and political stability in Libya, and ask them to form a High Council to rule the country.
Haftar said the government and parliament had lost any legitimacy because they were unable to purge the OPCE producer of extremists, roaming around unchallenged. His campaign received a boost after Libya's top air defense commander declared support for his movement, which kicked off on Friday, with a strike against al-Nusra Shara'a and other militant groups in the eastern city of Benghazi. Residents in the capital, Tripoli, reported several loud explosions early Thursday near the Al Yarmouk air defense barracks after air defense top commander Jum'a al-Abbani released a video message pleading his support for Haftar's so-called Operation of Dignity against Islamists. Heavy fighting involving anti-aircraft machine guns mounted on trucks also broke out overnight near the army camp in Tajura, an eastern suburb. At least 2 people from Mali died in the fighting, and dozens of others were reportedly wounded. Many Libyans have grown frustrated with the government and the parliament's failure to contain Islamist fighters and other militias who took part in a rebellion and who have since then openly defied authorities, demanding more oil revenue and power.
Tensions are high in Turkey's second city of Istanbul following clashes between anti-government protesters and security services. Riot police fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse a group of demonstrators protesting over the government's handling of the recent mine disaster, which left over 300 people dead. A group of about 20 protesters threw Molotov cocktails and stones at police, setting fire to an armored vehicle and seriously injuring 1 person. Two vehicles hurled explosives into an open market in China's Xinjiang, killing 31 people and injuring more than 90, the deadliest act of violence in the region in years.
31 commuters had an unexpected date with fate this morning after unknown attackers crashed 2 cars into shoppers at a market in China's Xinjiang regional capital, Urumqi. They also threw explosives during the attack, leaving more than 90 people injured. The Ministry of Public Security called it a violent terrorist incident and vowed to crack down on the perpetrators.
The violence, a further indication of the terrorists' anti-human, anti-society and anti-civilization nature, should be condemned by the Chinese people and the international community.
In response to the attack, Chinese President Xi Jinping stated that his government has the confidence and capability to crack down on the terrorists who will never achieve their purposes, as it will continue to work hard in fighting terrorism. Earlier this week, Chinese courts jailed 39 people as part of what the authorities have described an operation to curb the spread of audio and video materials inciting terrorism. Beijing has blamed a series of violent incidents on Uyghur separatists. These include an attack in Beijing where a car plowed into pedestrians in Tiananmen Square, killing 5 people, and of the attacks at railway stations in both Urumqi and Kunming.
Tensions are on the rise once again along the Korean peninsula. North and South Korean warships exchanged artillery fire in disputed waters, in the latest sign of animosity between the bitter rivals.
In the latest sign of rising tensions along the Korean peninsula, North Korean artillery fired into disputed waters near a South Korean warship, which was on patrol south of the maritime Yellow Sea border. Although there was no damage to the South's ship, Pyongyang's move prompted a response from the South Korean vessel, which fired several rounds into waters near a North Korean vessel.
Today at 6 p.m. an artillery bomb was dropped near our Navy ship, which was on the patrol mission in our waters, 14 kilometers south of the Northern Limited Line, so immediately we fired back near the enemy vessels in response.
For its part, North Korea threatened to target any South Korean warships in the disputed waters.
From this very moment, all warships of the South Korean puppet navy, big and small, which recklessly maneuver in the sensitive waters of the southwestern front, will become our direct targets.
The latest warnings come following an incident earlier this week when Seoul fired warning shots at the North's patrol boats that breached the so-called Northern Limit Line. Pyongyang has refused to recognize the line that was drawn up at the end of the Korean War in 1953 and has frequently challenged it with the intrusion of ships or even by firing artillery. Although the Northern Limit Line has been the scene of frequent clashes, this latest incident may be little more than another episode of military muscle flexing by the rival Koreas, which have technically been in a state of war for over 5 decades.
Up to 380 million Europeans will vote in 28 countries, choosing 751 deputies to represent them in the European Parliament. According to opinion polls, the Eurosceptic parties are likely to be the beneficiaries of a disillusioned electorate.
British and Dutch voters are the first to cast their ballots for members of the European Parliament. Turnout in previous European elections has hovered around 30 to 35%, but this year the figure could be higher as voters rally behind the populist anti-EU United Kingdom Independence Party, which is widely predicted to top the poll.
In their own way, so they don't have to work too hard, do they? Because they think, oh, in Labour constituencies, we're going to get in because we're Labour, and we've always been Labour, so we don't have to do no work. Conservatives exactly the same. I mean, where my daughters come from, Brentwood and all that, they've said enough's enough then. We can't vote for Cameron, he lied. He's told us we're going to have a referendum, he's told lies, never done it. So can you trust him on the next one?
I was born 1939 before the war, and I can remember after the war, and things were so different. When I was 16, 17, I didn't have to worry. I could jack a job in the afternoon and go and get another one. Down in Silvertown, I worked at Tate & Lyle's, Keeler's. You could do all that. I've got granddaughters, twin granddaughters. Do you think they can get a decent job? No.
All three of Britain's main political parties have strongly criticised UKIP, which wants Britain to leave the European Union and impose much tougher immigration controls. The scene is similar in the Netherlands, where the latest polls forecast that over 23% of the vote will go to the Dutch anti-Islam and anti-EU Freedom Party, which plans to forge an alliance with France's far-right National Front. With Europe struggling to recover from an economic crisis, including record-high unemployment and negligible growth, the election is expected to produce a surge in support for parties on both the far right and left. The bulk of countries in the 28 EU member bloc will vote on May 25, when the trend towards the political extremes may become even clearer.
Dubbed the Tree of Life, the moringa is the latest plant species to enter the field of alternative medicine. Its benefits against a number of diseases has made it the subject of study in Sudan. Our Sudanese correspondent Ahmed Saeed Ahmed filed the following report.
Mint, cardamom, and other herbs are all predecessors to a newcomer in the field of alternative medicine, moringa. Moringa has enthralled people all over the world with its medicinal and other surprising uses, which include biofuel.
The products of this tree are rich in minerals such as iron, phosphorus, calcium, and are also rich in vitamins such as vitamin A and vitamin C. It also strengthens the immunity system. It includes antioxidants and provides fodder to animals, which in turn provide milk and meat.
The most common genus of the plant, Moringa oleifera, is indigenous to the Himalayas, and Moringa stenoplata, native to Africa, are both used to treat ailments comprising vitamin deficiency and hair loss, among others.
The so-called life tree is used to treat diabetes, blood pressure, and obesity. It is also used to treat over 300 diseases, but attention must be paid to how it is used to accomplish these goals.
People use moringa in a variety of fashions, ranging from direct consumption of leaves and pods to applying moringa oil to one's body, as well as drinking moringa tea to regulate blood pressure and diabetes. This is the moringa tea, which includes a number of nutrient substances. It is prepared in the same manner as regular tea, but it mustn't be boiled. This is infant food, which serves as an alternative to Cerelac. The Sudanese president dubbed moringa the family tree, while the tree's benefits left such a strong impression that the country's Ministry of Science and Technology established the Moringa Research Council to explore the tree's prospects and held a conference at the ministerial level.
We are here today at the first Moringa conference to publish the research conducted by you, the researchers. Research which enriches our knowledge about the tree and to enlighten regular citizens, traders and consumers about the benefits of this great tree.
Moringa is being taken note of all over the world for its medicinal and commercial prospects, which are said to yield $25 billion annually. The government of Sudan ordered the allocation of 100,000 acres in each of the 18 states of the country for cultivating the so-called tree of life, in a step marking the significance of the plant. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed, Al-Ittijah News Channel, Khartoum.
Frenchman Julien Collemot came to Pakistan at the age of 30 as a humanitarian worker, but his love for languages and books has made him one of the country's most innovative Urdu novelists.
Among the tombstones of Lahore's oldest cemetery roams an unlikely figure. Julien, a Frenchman obsessed with literature, Urdu literature. He comes here to visit the tomb of Sagar Siddiqui, a vagabond poet from the 1950s, and someone Julien made a hero in one of his novels.
It's extremely important for me. I feel like I owe him everything. That's why I come here often to pay tribute to him, to talk to him. Sometimes when I have writer's block, I come to talk to him and it always works.
Since he moved here in 2003, he's published 3 books in Urdu, the official language of Pakistan. Novels, short stories, this writer does it all, and in a language learnt at university in India in his early 20s. After having worked as an interpreter for the Red Cross, among others, he's now the only known French writer to produce work in Urdu.
There
is a big cultural difference between the East and the West. There is a cultural difference in such a way that Julien's observations about Pakistani society, to understand it and to express it, is a fascinating thing for us.
A fascination that annoys Julien, who wants to be recognized as a writer in his own right.
At first I was tempted to use a pen name, a local pen name, to avoid a situation where people would read my novel just to know how a foreigner writes in Urdu. Someone said to me, "No, what? What do you have to hide? Publish it under your real name, it's ridiculous." So there was sort of publicity around that.
C'est absolument ridicule. Donc, il y a eu une sorte de publicité qui a été faite autour de ça.
Julien isn't just the Frenchman who writes in Urdu anymore. After years of living between India and Pakistan, he's now part of the local writers' scene. He spends his evenings discussing literature with the most famous authors of the subcontinent. His style, though, is still different to theirs.
Even our writers, when they want to express themselves forcefully, they say it with a certain limit. His expression is so bold that I fear his books may be banned here.
Even if his books were banned, Julien is committed to working at improving his mastery of his adopted tongue.
You've tuned in to Al-Ittijah World News. Let's have a last look at our headlines. Russia and China veto a UN Security Council resolution aborting a Western push to refer Syria to International Criminal Court. Thailand's army chief announces a military takeover, dissolving the government and suspending the constitution. Heavy clashes in eastern Ukraine between Kiev's forces and separatists leaves over a dozen dead as presidential elections loom. That's all for this bulletin. Have a good night.